So today we're going to talk about the history of evolutionary thought. And believe it or not, the theory of evolution has evolved in itself. It all started with a guy by the name of Aristotle. And Aristotle was this really evolutionary revolutionary thinker. He was before Common Era, a couple thousand years ago, and he's the one that developed the scientific method. He was very innovative. He was very interested in relationships between living and non-living things. And he was really interested in identifying the difference between living, or biotic, bio means life, and non-living, abiotic, a means without, bio, life, without life, non-living things. And he was really the first one to make detailed recordings of zoology, studying animals through dissections, and making observations of how these animals interacted with their habitats. And through his observations, he developed this hypothesis that there was a ladder of life. And in this ladder of life, there were non-living things at the very bottom, way down here. And those would be rocks and water and soil and dirt. And that as you go up the ladder, things with more complex traits and more complex interactions were showing up. So on the very next level would be lower plants, then higher plants. And as we go up and up and up, we become more, or these organisms become more and more complex with more and more complex traits. And at the very top of this ladder would be humans. And then above humans would be demons, and above demons would be angels, and above angels would be God. And he wanted to identify the relationship and the hierarchy of this life. And he believed that all life on earth was introduced by a divine creator, and that he put these things in this ladder, in this order, so that there would be order on earth. And he believed that life forms did not change over time. What was on earth at that time had always been on earth. And what was going to be on earth in 10,000 years was going to be the same as what was there currently. He may have believed this because he did not have knowledge of the fossil records. He didn't know the science of geology or the science of earth and rock and soil layers. He didn't understand genetics. So there was a lot of things that he was lacking. But he did do a wonderful job at describing organisms' function based on the structure and form that they had. So for example, he was able to describe the function of or the structure and form of a wing based on its function. And he said that there must be a relationship between a wing and a fin because they have similar structures and forms and they do similar things. And he also said that as things were developing, they were trying to reach this greater good that was given to them by their maker. It took almost 2,000 years before anybody challenged the ideas of Aristotle. And the first one to really come up with a profound new theory of evolution was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. And he came up with his hypothesis based on some new sciences that had come out: geology, the study of earth, and paleontology, the study of fossils. And as these sciences kind of came about, Lamarck began to see relationships and changes in fossil records. And he came up with an evolutionary theory that he referred to as Lamarckism. And Lamarckism says this, that organisms can change their traits or characteristics based on inner needs. He noted that traits would change over time. He understood that things were not stagnant, like Aristotle had said. And he was able to see this because of the fossil record. He was able to identify that traits were passed on because people began to study genetics, and he understood that traits would be passed on from generation to generation. But he believed that traits could be acquired from their inner need. What does that mean? Well, I have a short-necked giraffe here, and my short-necked giraffe is struggling to get an ample amount of food to survive. So that short-necked giraffe is going to want to stretch its neck to get a better reach towards those plants and would be better able to feed itself. So it wills itself to have a longer neck. And that neck would keep on stretching and stretching and stretching until it became progressively longer, and that organism would pass on its traits to the next generation, and eventually all giraffes would have a long neck. This would take many generations, but it was based on their inner need. Or in other words, based on my cartoon, Giraffes were okay in the beginning because they had short necks, but the trees were short. And as those trees got taller, well, the giraffe thinks to itself, damn, I can't get any food. So I need to think and believe that I can make my neck longer. And over time, that giraffe was able to will its neck to be longer, and that allowed it to have better access to food, survive better, and pass on its traits to future generations. Charles Darwin came about then and said, dude, you're bogus. That doesn't make any sense. Charles Darwin is an interesting character. He was a disturbed young man who started out in the monastery to become a priest. He went to school afterwards to become a doctor, but he couldn't stand the sight of blood. So he decided, I'm just going to become a scientist, collect data, and look at that data and see what happens. And he was lucky enough to get on a ship called the HMS Beagle that was going to take him to a new land. And they ended up going to the Galapagos Islands. And here he was able to study the form and function of organisms. He saw that species, all living things, had some similarities, but they also had things that were dissimilar amongst them. And he suggested that not all organisms in nature are created equal. So on his travel to the Galapagos, he saw great diversity in living things that he had never seen before. And he would see this diversity not just between Europe and the Galapagos, but also from island to island in the Galapagos. He collected samples in a variety of these species. He took detailed notes of the organisms and how they interacted with their environments. He collected data on species traits, and he noticed this. There was a struggle, a constant struggle to survive. So what he did was he would take data on his finches, and he would compare that data to characteristics of the environment that he found them in. And he noticed that the environment would influence those organisms' traits. He noticed that organisms that were best suited for their environment were more likely to pass on their traits, and that those traits could eventually change or evolve over time so that all organisms in that environment would have that same characteristic, that same trait, or all organisms within that population. So, for example, a finch that lives on an island that has hard, small seeds would need to have this short and powerful beak in order to break those seeds open and get their food. Organisms that lived on an island that had a cactus would have to have a longer and more slender beak so that they could get to the fruits and the flowers. Vegetarian finches might have a different beak in order to get the buds off of the ends of those branches, whereas a woodpecker finch would need to have a narrow beak in order to be able to break through bark and get its insects. A woodpecker finch would not be successful living in the environment of a large ground finch, or a vegetarian finch would not be successful in living in the environment of a woodpecker finch. They don't have the correct traits, they don't have the correct characteristics. They are suited for their environment, and their environment influences the traits that they have. Those that are not going to be successful will die and will not pass on their traits. The other thing that Darwin said is that all organisms have evolved from a common ancestor. So, in the end, Lamarck was wrong. Animals cannot will their necks to be longer to get the leaves that are in the trees. Instead, mutations would lead to new traits coming about. And those that have the better traits that would allow them to get food are more likely to survive. And our short-necked giraffes would die. And then again, those mutations would become greater, and my giraffe over many, many generations would have a longer neck, and it would be more likely to survive. The shorter-necked giraffes would die, and my long-necked giraffes would reproduce. And eventually, over time, those giraffes would typically have a long neck. And he called these beneficial traits adaptations. Adaptations are any trait within an organism that gives it the ability to better survive. So for a cheetah, that's its slight frame, long legs, and agility. For an owl, that's its ruffled feathers that make it a silent flyer, its large eyes that capture light and make it easy to see in low light situations, or its sharp claws that allow it to pick up prey on the fly. For a cactus, that's its widespread root systems that can store and pick up a ton of water, or its modified leaves that we call spines that don't evaporate water as fast and allow the cactus to retain water in that dry environment. Those are adaptations, things that increase their overall fitness. So a brief summary. Darwin founded the theory of evolution as we know it, and he said that we all have descended through a common ancestor. He called it descent through modification. And those physical modifications came from changes in our genotypes through sexual reproduction, meiosis, and crossing over, and independent assortment. And it also came from genetic mutations. He also said that there was survival of the fittest, a constant struggle to survive, and that those that have the best adaptations are the most likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their traits. It all starts with DNA, and DNA gets mutated. Those mutations will change the genotype, which will influence the phenotype, the physical characteristics. Over time, one phenotype is better than the other, and those organisms are more likely to survive and pass on their traits. And all organisms will have those similar characteristics. All living organisms will have those similar characteristics, which could lead to a new species. And that new species could either be very successful in that environment and could further evolve into new species, or it could become extinct. So let's look at natural selection and how we can explain that a little bit better in a different way.
Hi, my name is Mary Poppenroth. Hi, my name is Mary Poppenroth, and I'm an adjunct professor of biology, and today we're going to talk about natural selection.